Thank you very much. Would you like to say anything? No? Okay, fantastic. We'll move to our state auditor for her analysis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Assemblymember Santiago indicated, this would be an audit of the Department of Developmental Services, really focusing on in-home respite care and the rate-setting process, looking at some expenditures, but I'll step you through the specific objectives. First of all, evaluating DDS's process for setting rates for in-home respite care, whether or not that process complies with relevant laws, rules, regulations, et cetera. Is there any part of the process that really creates any kind of disparity among vendors or between vendors? There are two rate models. One is called a full-service model, and another model is called an employer of record model. What he's asked us to do is compare and contrast the rates under those different models, and why are the rates different? Again, to the extent possible, he wants us to look at regions throughout the state of California and compare market rates within those particular regions, both a market rate for in-home respite services and then the hourly rate that may be paid to individuals providing this type of care to the consumers. In addition, by region, again, we would separate it out that way. Identify the number of vendors who are actually providing these services, the number of consumers who are receiving in-home respite services, and then the number of in-home respite workers, how many individuals are actually providing these services, again, by region. And then he's asking us to look at the licensing requirements. What process does the Department of Developmental Services go through to license and make sure that particular vendor is properly licensed and has the appropriate insurance in place before becoming an authorized in-home respite service provider? And once we identify that, then he's asked us to look at the Department of Developmental Services and their process for overseeing those vendors to make sure that they maintain that insurance and that they maintain the appropriate protocol or follow the appropriate protocols to maintain their licensure requirements. He's asking us to look at a sample of in-home respite vendors for fiscal year 13-14. He's asking us to look at any of those vendors that received revenue in excess of $7 million and then identifying specific information related to those vendors. First is how much revenue did those vendors receive from public funds by the applicable model. As I said, there are two models that we're aware of. What's the hourly rate being paid to in-respite workers, the amount and source of revenue that's coming from public funds, and the amount and percentage of administrative costs. Also asking us within that same sample, looking at major categories of expenditures and testing some of those expenditures to make sure that they're appropriate, they're allowable, they're reasonable expenditures for this particular program. And then the last issue ties back to administrative costs. In his letter to the chair or to the committee, he is concerned about administrative cost caps. In some instances, it appears there are cost caps for some contracts and not for others. And he's asking us to examine the Department of Developmental Services decision-making process. Why do some contracts have a cap and while others do not? So that's the last objective that we would accomplish with respect to this particular audit. We've budgeted at about 2,800 hours. That's about a 7-month project. The reason for that is the variety of different tasks that we've been asked to do, being able to do the regional analysis and then actually doing some testing. And we may end up having to go out on site. We're not sure within the regions, but we should be able to complete the audit within 7 months.
Thank you very much. At this point, we would like to invite the affected agency or department to please come up and join us at the table. As you're coming, you can have a seat right here and state your name and the department you're representing.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. John Doyle, Developmental Services. We understand the concerns raised by Assemblymember Santiago and would note that this is a program that provides services to over 50,000 individuals in California with intellectual and developmental disabilities. However, we'd also point out that the inconsistency in rate levels, the difference between the high and low range of the rates, is caused as much by a statute that has frozen rates since 2003. So we welcome the state auditor looking at the program, but believe that as the program is administered by the overseen by the department, administered by the regional centers, we believe that they are in compliance with existing statute.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next, any members would like to have any questions?
Just a brief one. Thank you.
Please. Member.
Thank you, Mr. Santiago, for bringing forward the request. The comments we've just heard from Mr. Doyle just raise a question. I'm going to support this audit either way, but I would like to know this. How much were you able to reach out to the department and ask for some of this information? This is a very expensive audit. 7 months is a long time. And we want to make sure that the focus is really on what the auditor is the best person to find out, as opposed to the ability of you as a member and us as a body to just get some of these answers, particularly why some contracts have caps and some don't. I think that's something we could probably find out without a full audit. And are you open to potentially narrowing that? And I welcome also the input of the auditor if there's any areas that might best be removed so that you can focus otherwise.
No, and I appreciate your question. That's actually a pretty good question, and we have talked to the department. Actually, and I'll give you the origin of why we went to the audit route as opposed, I think in conjunction with how we started. We started off with a bill idea. And the bill idea was to try to line up in-home respite care services the same way that other services for the developmentally disabled communities was done, which was 85% service, 15% an administrative cost. And when we were diving into the bill, we began to realize that we needed some data, and there were some questions that perhaps DDS couldn't answer at the time to make our bill stronger. And in an effort to make that bill stronger, we began to take a look at the need possibly to look at the data. The data will actually tell us whether we were on the right track towards that bill, or whether we need to look at a different track. The other thing, too, is it could show that the rates are too low. I mean, that's one thing that could potentially happen. It could show that the rates need some consistency, but the origin of this really began to try to increase the services for the developmentally disabled community, in particular at a time when the legislature, I think, has shown some aggressiveness to try to improve funding in that particular area. And really that was the origin. So we have been in communication with the department, and was in communication with the department last year, but found that we weren't able to get some of the information. So I think the audit was the best way to be able to get some of this information.
So when you say that you weren't able to get the information, was it that the department didn't have it? And I don't know if Mr. Doyle wants to chime in as well on that, or that it was not available.
Well, I would let the department answer that, but I think in some cases maybe it wasn't there, and in other cases I think I'm not quite sure, but I think in some cases it wasn't there.
Mr. Doyle, I welcome your thoughts.
I'm not sure specifically which information is being referred to there. Some of the information that is being requested regarding the number of providers in the community, things like that, we have estimate numbers on those. So I'm not quite sure which specific information was requested we weren't able to provide.
I guess what my encouragement would be that as much as possible, the simple here's where it is data be provided so the auditor can spend most of her time on what is more difficult to get, so that if we can, I'd love to see this audit come in at less time and particularly less money when there sounds to me to be a fair amount of information that should have been exchanged in the pre-audit process. And I'm supportive of this audit. I'm absolutely supportive of more funding to the developmentally disabled. That's the subject of another day. But really would encourage us to make sure that as much as possible is getting to the auditor that is quick and easy and almost obvious, so that she can focus on something maybe more challenging. Thank you.
No, and I appreciate those comments. Absolutely. I would appreciate that as well.
Thank you very much. Any other members have any comments for these witnesses on this subject matter?
I just wanted to comment, when I was in my previous life as Chief of Staff to Assemblywoman Barbara Matthews, we had a caucus in the legislature that really focused on trying to bring more funding for those who use these services. And for 1 year, we had a very slight, modest increase, and then the budget crisis came. And we all know what happened after that. And the reductions that occurred after that have never been restored. So I think that in this area, they're woefully underfunded to begin with, and that they've been really struggling to try to provide services. So I guess I'm not really fully understanding, are there very distinct problems that have come up where it's obvious that something's wrong, or is it just that there's an audit request for the sake of doing an audit?
No. Well, I'll reiterate that the origin of it was to try to line up, like the rest of developmentally disabled services, was 85% to services and then 15% to administrative cost. We had some challenges with some of the data, and so we're now requesting the data to be able to make a strong case for a cap to administrative services, therefore releasing more money, cap for the administrative portion of it, therefore releasing more money to the services.
Okay. If no further comments from my colleagues, we'll move to the public comments. If you wish to have a comment, we invite you to use this microphone to my right. You have 2 minutes to make public comments. And if whoever's ready can come forward, that'd be fine. Great. Thank you.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Cani Coelho. I'm living in San Leandro in Alameda County, and I am a member of the SIU 2015. I am the sole caregiver of my son, Celso. He's here, who is 27 years old and has a developmental disability. I'm here today because I am in need of Respect Care, but haven't been able to find a good caregiver. Respect Care agencies should be held accountable for provide high-quality care. My son is my life, and he is with me all the time. I help him get showered, feed, and dressing every morning, pick him up and drop him off at school, which takes me an hour each time. He has also had an eating disorder and problems with vomiting when under stress, so his weight has to be closely monitored. Right now, I don't have Respect Care because it's hard to find someone I trust. Years ago, my sisters provided Respect Care, so I could attend English classes. If I had Respect Care, I could spend time outside the house with friends and family. Parents need this service because we need to take the time to take care of ourselves.
30 seconds.
I'm asking you, on behalf of families like mine, to provide the audit. How do we know there's not more funding for Respect Care if we don't know how the funds are used? We need to know how the Respect Care companies spend the money, because we need more service and we need better service.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Hello, I'm Sarah Vicencio. I live in Salinas. I have 3 kids, a member of the SEIU 2015. Out of 3 children, I have 2 with disabilities. And my daughter's 15, and my son is just turned 17. They have heart problems, asthma, scoliosis has just really just taken off. Has gotten a lot worse. I receive 24 hours in-home respite care a month, but it's not enough in taking care of them, because you basically lose yourself, your social life. You can't just get up and go wherever you feel like it. The simple things that we take for granted. Even though I depend on in-home respite care, it hasn't been easy to finding a care provider. A lot of the workers don't have any background checks, and unfortunately, some of them have stolen from us or taken things for granted or wrote down hours that were not paid for. So I don't quite understand how the money does work for any of this, and I would just like a background check on most of these guys, and we do want respite service in our area, and it would be really appreciated. And I was supposed to stick to this, but I don't like speaking in public. I get nervous, so I apologize for that.
Doing a great job.
All right, and I don't know if you guys have any questions about it or what it's like. Feel free to ask.
Thank you very much for your comment.
Buenos días, miembros del comité. Mi nombre es Zoila Ramírez. Soy residente de la ciudad de Lynchburg y miembro de SIU 2015. Estoy aquí hoy para pedir la aprobación sobre la solicitud para una auditoría y responsabilizar las agencias de cuidado de relevo en la forma como ofrecen los servicios a las familias como a mí. Y yo soy la única cuidadora de hogar para mi hijo Ricardo, de 26 años de edad, porque Ricky es autista y no puede hablar. Él necesita a alguien las 24 horas del día. Yo le cepillo los dientes todas las mañanas y también le ayudo a comer, a lavarle su ropa, y especialmente es difícil porque él hace berrinches y es muy difícil calmarlo. Ser un cuidador de casa a tiempo completo es agotante. Dependo del servicio de cuidado de relevo. Sin embargo, recibo solo 24 horas de servicio al mes y que no es suficiente, especialmente cuando Ricky tiene sus berrinches. Las agencias de cuidado de relevo deben de ser responsables en cómo utilizar el dinero, porque siempre nos dicen que no hay suficiente fondo para proporcionar más horas y que el Estado ha limitado las horas de servicio de relevo debido a problemas de presupuesto. Gracias. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, committee members. I'm Samantha Contreras with SCIU 2015. I'm going to quickly translate what Zoila just said. My name is Zoila Ramirez. I'm a resident of Lynwood and a member of SCIU 2015. I'm here today to urge you to approve the audit request so we can hold respite care agencies accountable for how they provide services for families like mine. I'm the sole caregiver for my 26-year-old son, Ricardo. Because Ricky is severely autistic and cannot speak, he needs someone to look after him 24 hours a day. I brush his teeth every morning, and I also help him to eat. Washing him is especially difficult because he throws tantrums, and it's very hard for me to calm him down. Being a full-time caregiver is exhausting, so I really depend on respite care. However, I only get 24 hours of respite care a month, which isn't enough, especially when Ricky is throwing tantrums. Respite care agencies need to be held accountable for how they spend the money, because we are always told that there isn't enough funding to provide more hours, and the state limited respite hours due to state budget problems. If resources are limited, then we need to make sure that payments made to respite agencies are being spent primarily on direct care services and not administrative expenses. Thank you for this time.
Thank you very much. Member Santiago, you wish to close?
I respectfully ask for your support on this audit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this time, we are short 2 senators. Again, if you are a senator that is on the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, we request you to please join us in room 447 so we can establish a quorum. Member Santiago, we will delay this until we receive a quorum, and then we'll be moving on. So thank you very much, and we'll take the vote at that time.
Thank you.
Okay. We have Assembly Member Gatto. Would you please come up and take the table? Take the stand. And he will be filling in for Speaker-elect, who was on the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, for Member Rendon. This is dealing with item number 2016-104, the California Public Utilities Commission contracting practices. So, Member Gatto, when you're ready, feel free to proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Gibson. The last time I appeared before you was I was a young attorney, and you were a young member of the Carson City Council.
That's right.
Almost a decade ago. But thank you for allowing me to testify on behalf of Speaker-elect Rendon. This audit was requested by the Utilities and Commerce Committee, and it has to do with examining the California Public Utilities Commission's contracting practices. The committee, the Utilities and Commerce Committee, last year investigated some somewhat questionable CPUC-directed contracts to companies that have little or no experience in developing energy projects, sole source contracts that involve millions of dollars that were not publicly approved by the CPUC, and also contracts that did not specify deliverables. In August 2015, the Utilities and Commerce Committee held an informational hearing on these contracting practices, and this audit comes as a result of that hearing. The audit request specifically focuses a few areas, requests focusing on a few areas, including assessing the CPUC's contracting practices, assessing the extent to which the CPUC follows state contracting laws and rules, the extent to which the CPUC requires the entities it regulates to follow state contracting laws and rules when they carry out contracts on the CPUC's behalf, and the extent to which contractors participate as advocates in CPUC proceedings that influence contract award decisions and whether that's a conflict of interest. When you establish a quorum, I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you very much. State Auditor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. As Assemblymember Gatto indicated, this would be an audit of the CPUC and starting out looking at what state requirements actually apply to the PUC, not only state law, but also anything in the state contracting manual. If there are any areas for which the PUC has been exempted, is there a time limit on that exemption? What was the rationale for that exemption? So really looking at the criteria that CPUC is required to follow. And then taking that information and actually looking at the PUC's policies and practices and determining whether or not they really are ensuring the best value for the state of California, whether they're addressing and using competitive bidding, do they have a process to avoid conflicts of interest, et cetera. So really looking at their process. Then moving on and looking at a sample or a selection of contracts. Specifically, the committee has asked us to look at a 5-year window starting from 2010 carrying through to 2014. And within that selection of contracts, looking at the process the PUC used to solicit and award those contracts. Did it comply with the requirements for which PUC is required to follow? Whether or not those actual contracts that were awarded contain specific information in the contract, specific information related to what the performance expectations are. Are there specific deliverables identified in the contract? And what did PUC do to monitor those contracts to make sure that the entity awarded or the vendor awarded the contract actually performed what was expected? With respect to conflict of interest, assessing whether or not PUC complied with all of the laws, rules, and regulations related to avoiding conflicts of interest. There was a concern in the letter the committee sent to us that the PUC was awarding contracts within their delegated authority, so below a threshold that may require a competitive bid, and then subsequently amending that contract for a significantly higher amount. So we've been asked to specifically look for that, look for the original award amount of a contract and determine whether or not those contracts have been subsequently amended for a much higher amount beyond their delegated authority and the rationale for doing so. So we specifically will be looking for that. In addition, the committee wants us to look for sole source contracts and identify the number of sole source contracts, again, over that 5-year window, how many of those have been entered into by PUC, and a similar objective to what I just described of those sole source contracts, how many, again, may perhaps have been below a threshold amount and then were subsequently amended. Why were they subsequently amended? How many times were they subsequently amended, et cetera? So really, as Assemblymember Gatto indicated, looking at PUC's practices for their contracts they let themselves, but in addition to that, looking at utilities or the regulated entities that PUC oversees, and as Assemblymember Gatto indicated, in situations where PUC is asking those entities to contract on their behalf, going through some of the same steps and the same procedures and looking at how those contracts were awarded. Were they below a certain threshold, subsequently amended, et cetera. So a lot of the same objectives. In addition, the committee has asked us to look to determine whether or not some contractors actually have served as advocates and appeared before the PUC in a proceeding. And whether or not that really is a conflict of interest, is it in the best interest of the ratepayers, et cetera. So really looking at the practices that those contractors engage in. determine whether or not the utilities, as he indicated, are required to follow any state requirements related to competitive bidding, conflict of interest, et cetera, the deliverables in the contracts, and what is PUC doing to oversee that to the extent they have responsibility for that. In addition, similar, with respect to sole source contracts that were proposed by regulated entities that the PUC actually ultimately approved, same 5-year window, and looking at those contracts to determine whether they comply with requirements with respect to sole source contracting, whether those contracts actually resulted in best value, avoided conflicts of interest, et cetera. So really various objectives all tied to contracting, practices and procedures, not only competitive bidding, but sole source contracts, practices where they may have entered into a contract, either the PUC or one of their regulated entities, below a certain threshold and then subsequently amended that contract. In addition, the last objective is related to Public Records Act requests and looking at PUC's policies and procedures for responding to such requests specifically regarding contracts and whether or not those policies comply with state law, do they comply with appropriate policies, and then actually assessing some of those requests and determining how well PUC complied with the policies and state law in responding to those types of requests for public documents. The audit right now is budgeted at a little over 3,000 hours, again, because of the nature of the 5-year window and then the various types of contracting practices that the committee has asked us to look at. An audit of that size will be between 7 and 8 months in length, staff time.
Thank you very much to our state auditor. The affected agency, we would like to invite you to take a seat at the table, and we welcome your testimony. After which, members, we will open it up for members to ask any questions you may have of these witnesses. Please state your name.
Good morning, Chair Gibson and members. My name is Michelle Cook, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director over Administrative Services at the California Public Utilities Commission. While being audited is not anyone's favorite experience, we welcome the opportunity to identify shortcomings and improve our processes. The Department of General Services does perform regular compliance audits of all department contracting practices. The DGS audit gets to some of the issues that are raised in the audit request. And we were actually audited last year, and we expect the results to be completed later this year for purposes of the state auditor's consideration. We will continue to work with the legislature on this topic, including on any legislation such as AB 1651, which was introduced yesterday and speaks to contracting transparency and DGS compliance audits in the CPUC. And I'm available to answer any questions that you might have for me as you consider this request.
Thank you very much, members. There's questions and answers of any of these witnesses. Hearing and seeing none, we will invite the public to provide any comments you may have. 2 minutes is the limit. We invite you to please take this microphone to my right, to your left. Any public comment? Hearing and seeing none, Member Gatto for closing remarks.
I just want to note that the Department of General Services has audited the Energy Commission 4 times between 2011 and 2015, but it has not audited the CPUC since 1995. I think this audit is very important. It'll cast some much-needed sunshine into the process, and I respectfully ask your vote.
Thank you very much. We will hold this over until we establish a quorum. Once again, we need 2 senators to please join us in room 447 so we can establish a quorum. We have items before us that need you to participate in. Next. Okay. Which one are we doing? Next, we will have item number 2016-102, High Speed Rail Authority. Senator Vodak, we invite you to the table. Any of your witnesses? And also, while we're doing this, why don't we ask the affected agency to join the table as well? So the affected agency, we are dealing with item number 2016-102, dealing with High Speed Rail Authority. Senator Vidak, welcome, and when you're ready to proceed, feel free.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and members, the LA Times recently exposed a 2013 report by Parsons Brinkerhoff that estimated that the cost of the building of the first phase of high-speed rail had risen 31% to $40 billion. Scientists, engineers, and tunneling experts all confirmed that high-speed rail will be behind schedule and over budget. The existence of the Parsons Brinkerhoff report and the fact that the authority hid it for 2 years does not speak well for the authority or the estimates it has provided to the legislature and the public. I'd like to thank Speaker Atkins for putting pressure on the authority to release the report, or we have never seen it. We all know the issues here. You all have seen the media reports, and last year we had an extensive hearing on the authority. I appreciate the committee's consideration for this matter, and thank you.